Well, good morning, everyone. I have a feeling a few more people will trickle in. Good morning, good morning. But in the meantime, if I don't kill you with the feedback, I want to introduce our forum speaker for today, and this is not my first time meeting Reverend Dr. Rusyn. We had the privilege of being with him in that retreat that Father Tim and I and Ernest were part of in Ukraine back in August. And I have to confess, even though I'm going to be heard publicly, that his engagement with that was really profound to me, and hearing some of his reflections as a theologian, as a practitioner, and as someone who is a child of God living in the middle of war and conflict, and seeking both to process his own experience of that while also leading others through how to think through and respond to that, was very humbling for me and enlightening as well. And so I'm so grateful that he agreed to come and speak. He's on a blitz tour of the US, and not just the US, I think Brazil as well, and was here in DC for some other speaking engagements and agreed to spend this morning with us. And I asked him, in kind of fitting into our series, to speak on your will be done, which is sort of where we are in our consideration of the Lord's Prayer. And it's kind of a hard one all of a sudden to pray that when you're coming from where Ivan is coming from right now. And if we can get some of these photos to work, his seminary was bombed earlier last year. So this is a difficult time for a seminary president to be thinking of your will be done. And so we asked him to speak on doing God's will when God's hand remains hidden. So this is sort of a painful but beautiful response to that prayer. So, Ivan.
We will be without photos. Okay, this is a privilege for me to be together with you today. I have to apologize for my perfect Ukrainian English. English is not my first language, so I suffered a lot trying to learn your language, and now you will suffer a lot to hearing my English. It's a privilege for me to share about the way how we reread the Bible in the context of war. And as you know that 610 days ago, the full-scale war started in Ukraine. And first thing that I learned was that everything you knew about war is wrong. You had your own ideas what war is about. You had expectation how you will react and how other people will react. Everything is different when war starts. War is pure evil. It is hell. I witnessed strong men who were promising to go and fight and neutralize Putin by themselves, and they just crashed. They just disappeared. And I see many young and not young, tiny ladies who are demonstrating courage and leadership. And you can't critique people on how they react, because that reaction comes from somewhere really deep inside of you. You have never, there was no opportunity for you to see how you will react. And in the beginning, I want to tell you that something more about war. This war is not about the land. This war is about the very existence of an ethnic group. This war is about identity, values, freedom, justice. Unfortunately, under Russian dominion, there is no space for this, for the Ukrainian identity. So this is the reason why we fight, because for us it is clear, fight or die. So this is a people's war in Ukraine, where everybody wants to contribute toward victory and toward freedom. You know, it is great when you have beautiful life, safe life, when everything is predictable. Then you can develop really nice theology. You can develop answers for every kind of questions. You have enough space to polish everything, and your theological system looks perfect. You are happy, everybody is happy. And indeed, sometimes our theology shape our practice. But there are times when your practice, your life, significantly refine your theology or even reshape, especially if your theology has been developed in a greenhouse. This war is an existential crisis for us as a Ukraine. So, of course, such a big challenge significantly impacted our understanding of God, the Bible, church, the world. And this war reshaped our understanding of many Christian virtues. And I have to confess that some of Christian virtues that I used to love and to preach a lot about it, now when I hear those words, I feel unpleasant emotions. Love? What do you mean to love? Hope? I don't like hope. You know why? Because you don't need hope and everything is okay. The only time when you need hope and you have troubles, and of course in Ukraine we need hope. Forgiveness? When I hear this word, I am prompted to ask, what do you mean? Maybe you want to tell me that I have to forgive my enemies. You know, this is if you are authentic. If you express what you really feel. Just prior to this trip, I was in Brazil, in São Paulo, and we had a small consultation on integral mission and reconciliation. And there was a person from the Russian Federation. And he was sharing how great the relief ministry is in Russia toward Ukrainian refugees, my fellow citizens. And while I was here listening to him, I realized that when I was thinking about integral mission, I always thought that love is required. And this is still true. You can't take care about spiritual and physical needs of people if you don't love them. But at that moment, I realized that you can't do integral mission without justice. I don't want to listen about love at this moment. My soul longs to hear the word justice. And I tell him, my dear brother, while you were helping these Ukrainian, my fellow citizens in Russia, why you didn't ask yourself what brought them to Russian Federation? What happened with their homes? Why they need your food and your accommodation? And I told him that integral mission in your case is to stand up and say to your government, stop and repent. So war reshaped everything. And I can tell you that I am struggling with some biblical texts. I am struggling with some invitations I hear to myself. I am struggling when I am reading the text, love your enemies, forgive your enemies. And you know what? I realized that there is one invitation to forgive that I respect. And I make myself ready to follow. It is the one that comes from the cross, by the crucified one. And when I see Jesus being crucified, and he is asking Father to forgive, I tell him, Jesus, I don't like this invitation. But because you are asking it, being crucified, I will follow. Thy will be done. On earth as it is on heaven. It's a very difficult statement for me. And we have quite often the tension between speaking theological language, between realized and future eschatology, with everything we believe is true, and we don't know how to reconcile it with things we are experiencing. And this is true even if you don't have war. Sometimes we are facing challenges related to our job, marriage, health, relationship, and we don't know how to reconcile these two statements. In the context of war, everything is even harder, because the questions of life and death are involved. The hardest thing for me during these 600 days of war was to see when innocent people are suffering. When you see a Ukrainian soldier lying down killed, it is hard. And you see that his friends, they cannot come to take his body because snipers are working. But you can say, this is the war. You know, he is a soldier. But when you see civilians being killed, when you see a body of a 75 years old man who was riding a bicycle trying to find food to survive, and he was shot by a sniper, like, why do you kill that man? When you hear that girls have been abused and they are pregnant, what will you tell them? So, and of course you ask a lot of questions, but Jesus teaches us to pray that his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Sometimes I want to ask myself, what are these words about? It is our cry to God and our request to him to start to act, to do something, or it is a reminder for us and call to us to obey. When we ask God to make his will on the earth as it is in heaven, are we really serious when we ask it? Are we able to follow that invitation? Or are we ready to pray this prayer that sounds like this: not my will, but your will be done? Are we able to drink that cup? What if this petition is not about manifesting God's mighty deeds, but a call to obey his will and to do on his behalf? What if Jesus wants us to be his lips and his hands? What if he wants to give a hug to a person in suffering through me. Jesus promised always to be with us, but he has never promised us to be visible. Some people ask me, did I see Jesus in the city of Bucha? I am from Bucha. My apartment is in Bucha, and this city, unfortunately, is famous for atrocities. So, did I see Jesus? I didn't see him as a supernatural figure, as an angel, or something powerful. But I can tell you that now I can say that Jesus was not in Bucha. It seems for me that I always hear his voice when a volunteer is asking, how can I help you? In that question, I hear his voice. And also I hear his voice when an elderly lady who was left behind, but then volunteers showed up with provision, with water, with medicine. And then she says, thank you, you are my angels. So I was able to see Jesus in such situation. You know, sometimes we think that if we will have encounter with God, we will be strong. We will be able to run fast. There is one story about one encounter with the Lord that Jacob has had. Somehow he started to limping after that encounter. And you know, when you have to travel a lot, a long distance, limping is not that you are looking for. God's will is done in a very vulnerable way. Yes, you had this encounter with the Lord, but you are not as strong as you were before. You are limping. And every step you make, that pain reminds you who you are and who He is. In the beginning of the war, I felt in my heart that I want to ask the Lord, what is going on? Why these things are happening? But later, I just started to think, why do I think that this is my responsibility to ask the Lord why everything is happening? What if He wants to ask the same question? Like, people, what is going on? I realized that God accomplishes His will most often through us. And He wants to be His instruments. Of course, theologically, we understand that we are not bringing His kingdom. He does not need our assistance. But by our nature, by our identity, way of life, we can be a foretaste of His kingdom. And the best confirmation of my belief in kingdom of God, it is when I live according to that values of the kingdom. I learned that it is wrong to make quick decisions about God's presence. There was many times when I didn't have question why your hand is invisible. I wanted to ask Him, are you here? Or are you there? But this war taught me not to make decisions very fast. Jewish rabbis are telling that when Moses wanted to see God's face, God told him that he can see just his back. And they said that we can see where God was. We can see His nature when we are looking backward. There were many times when I thought that there is no God in Ukraine. But now, when I look back, I see that he was right there. We spent first days in Bucha, in a basement which used to be a gym where we did fitness, and then it turned to be our shelter. I was able to see how young lady, young mom, she was losing her mind, and she lost ability to function and to operate. A lot of explosions, Russian helicopters, fighter jets, and then last day of February, calm day, sun is shining, no explosions. And my wife, she gets like the word from the Lord, you must leave now. She called to her brothers, younger brothers. They have 4 children together. They are already sick because of the cold. And she told them, we are leaving right now. They say, no, there is no need. Everything's calmed down. You are my younger brothers. You have to obey me. So they left. When I was telling her goodbye, it was very awkward because I didn't know if she make it or not. She got just a small backpack. And later we learned that in that very day, in that very moment, Russian soldiers like withdraw a little bit from our city. And there was a short window of opportunity to leave the city. So at that moment when I was telling my wife goodbye, having no idea will I see her again or not, I was not very confident about God and His presence. But now I see that He was right there. So my friends, you have your own missiles flying above your heads. We have physical Russians. Maybe you have missiles in your marriage, in your health area, in your jobs. I want to encourage you, if you feel forgotten by the Lord, give Him a time. I guarantee that sometime later, when you will look backward, you will realize that He was right besides you. So, what I take from this prayer, God is, He reigns, He controls everything. But He invites us to be His instruments of love and hope. And I am amazed that God is calling us in a way that we can say no. God wants us to follow Him and to serve His will because we want. Because we are grateful, not because we are obligated. And it's a great miracle when His presence and His will is done through very vulnerable and ordinary people. This is the biggest miracle. So I am challenged by this text because this text prompts me to think, am I ready to follow Him where He is not really visible? Am I ready to be the instrument of His will in this broken world? Am I ready to redefine my concept of neighbor? In the past, my neighbor is my family member or a member of my church. Now this war made every Ukrainian my neighbor. So, being in the middle of the war, I am challenged to rethink many things that I have developed before the war. And I am challenged by His invitation for me to follow Him. He really promised me to be with me, to be present, but sometimes He is present invisibly. And sometimes his presence is visible only when it takes some time. So when I look back, and I remember standing on I think it is working already. I remember standing on a 15th floor and seeing how Kiev is surrounded by the Russians and everything on smoke and fire. So, and now there is no Russians in a close proximity to Kiev. So when people ask me how Kiev survived, I tell them, I'm sorry, I have no non-religious explanations. The only explanation that works for me is him. And I can tell you that now in Ukraine, churches are doing a great job. And churches are loved and respected by the society. Why? Because they saved millions of lives through its relief ministry. And I believe that our country has a bright future and will be transformed to this ministry. So even though it is hard, God is accomplish His will. And sometimes if we want to be part of His will, we have to go beyond our former experience. I had a pretty good, as I thought, theology of mission because I'm a missiologist. I didn't have, by the way, because now I understand what does it mean. First of all, if we want to do God's mission, if we want to be an instrument of His will, we have to serve according to His model. We can't achieve God's will using not God's values or methods. And the first challenge is incarnation, to be incarnated. There is one religion. The founder of that religion, when he was persecuted in one city, he just left to another city. In Christianity, Jesus was going directly to Jerusalem, to the cross, to the epicenter of suffering. Jesus always shows up where suffering is. This is his, I don't know how to say it. It is his style. So this is why he incarnated to earth. He spoke with us using our language, face to face. So if we want to be an instrument of God's will in Ukraine, we have to be in epicenter of the suffering. We have to have the same scars our society has. And then, when we want to talk with our society, they very often are looking on us, and it's like they want to invite us, can you show us your scars? And I can tell you that in Ukraine, church can show the same scars. There is a song, Where Were You When Jesus Was Crucified? This song is sang by Ukrainian society. Where you were when we were crucified. And I'm happy to say to you the church is capable to say, we were right there. You see, they are our scars. So, and when we are doing God's will in His way, we have authenticity. In Ukraine, people are not looking for answers. People are looking for presence, sympathy, and authenticity. And when you are authentic, it does not mean that you have answers for your question, for all questions. Sometimes the most profound answer to suffering is silence. We don't know why it is happening, but we are with you. Sometimes to do His will when His hand is not visible means to have compassion. How I define compassion? To suffer together and suffer in the same way. I can tell you that in Ukraine, the church is suffering in the same way. We cry the same tears our society cries, but yet in our eyes something more than just tears. There is a hope. And our wounded society says, these people, it seems they know something more. They suffer the same way we do, but they have different attitude. And of course, we know something more. We know that Jesus has the final word. He will bring his kingdom, no doubt. So, we are struggling with some biblical texts, but we are doing it honestly. Sometimes we don't see God in the midst of us, but later, in a while, when we look back, we realize, wow, he was right there. It was him who orchestrated everything. So we survived, so we helped other people. So I invite you to be an instrument of God's will. And this is a very bold prayer. And sometimes God answers our prayers and give us chance to be instruments of his will. And it might be not easy, but there is nothing best in our life than to be part of his will. Thank you for your attention.
As promised, we have some time for questions. I know there's going to be a whole diversity of questions. Please be loving and gentle in your questions. And I'll have a microphone just so that the live stream can catch your voice. Questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. That was a very inspirational set of remarks. You mentioned that you were in Bucha. At the time you were there, did people have any idea of the horrors that were taking place? Or did they find out about that only after they were able to come out of the basements and other places?
Thank you for this question. We realized that everything will be extremely violent and serious first second of the war, when hundreds of missiles hit at different locations in our country. So it was very awkward for me to stand on my balcony on the 5th floor in my apartment and to see black Russian military helicopters flying around and shooting, and jets. We knew that it would be, this is a full-scale war. But what happened, Bucha, it's like a collective term for many cities. Unfortunately, Bucha is just the only one among many cities where atrocities happened. However, when we learned what happened in Bucha, of course, it's, we were speechless. I saw that mass grave nearby the Orthodox Church. We saw how our government, they did this excavating of that bodies. And again, I can explain when soldiers are being killed, but it was beyond our capacity to understand when you see women of different age being assassinated, being murdered. So, but there is not just only Bucha. There is Irpin, Hostomel, Mariupol. There are other cities. And why Russians they turned to be so violent? Because for years there was dehumanization of Ukrainians on the TV. So they came to kill Nazis, not people. So this is why in our apartment, they took some stuff and they tried to destroy everything, like TV, computers monitor, air conditioning. They were really upset that Ukrainians are not facing them with flowers. So, and then they met this resilience, you know, they were really wild. And if you will look how the way they do this war, they just destroy everything. So I think that Bucha really changed everything in our mentality about this war. And it was a significant impulse to make it even more people's war. Because to see what happened there, it was beyond our ability to comprehend. So, yes, please.
With the recent experience in Israel and Palestine, do you have eyes that see that experience differently because of what you're going through?
There is a great sympathy and compassion in Ukraine toward people in Israel. We don't need any explanation additional. We know what does it mean. So, and I think that the global and civilized world should do some extra steps in protecting freedom, justice, and dignity of people. Recently, our president told, I like this phrase, that freedom should be armored better than tyranny. It seems that in our world, sometimes tyranny is armed better. So I think that there is a question, what about other people? You may ask yourself, why should we bother about Ukraine? You know, they are thousands of miles away. I am happy that I am in Washington, D.C., and Martin Luther King had a powerful speech nearby your church. But his another statement was, injustice somewhere is a threat for justice everywhere. I think that it is impossible to enjoy the beauty and sweet taste of freedom, justice, democracy, freedom in your country when there is a small nation being killed just because they want to have a democratic and just society. So what about others? And I believe that these values that have been built on the Christian and biblical foundation, they require global responsibility. We cry with everybody who is persecuted and murdered. And in Ukraine, we know what does it mean. So, yes, please.
I think there is too often an incorrect reading of scripture that says turn the other cheek. That's a rabbit hole I can take you down. What is your personal Christian theology? This is a friendly question, by the way, that rallies you to fight your invaders?
We reread that statement about cheek. We have a different understanding of that now. Good, yeah. So we are fighting because this is the way how we demonstrate our authentic love to our neighbors. There is a big difference when you fight on the other's land. We fight, we protect our people, and I can tell that we protect a land, we protect our values, our identity. So I used to be a pacifist. maybe I will become one again. I truly respect my friends from Mennonite communities, pacifists, especially if they came from the countries that experience war. If I say that I am pacifist, but I have never been threatened, then my pacifism would sound perfect, but there is no real life. I was visiting Azerbaijan many years ago with a mission. I was teaching them how to forgive, how pacifistic they should be. Honestly, I want to go back there and tell them, please forgive me. I was telling you things that I had no clue about. So there is a significant shift in the theology of churches in Ukraine. And many evangelical and Protestants, they are serving in the army as soldiers. Some as chaplains, but most of them as soldiers. And we are protecting our country. And we want to be where suffering is. So even now, we haven't used collars before the full-scale war. Now we are using it because we want to be visible. So when we go to our soldiers, they can know that the church is present. Pastors are there. They can have spiritual support. So maybe we are reaching some extremes. And then global church later should come and tell us, you know, guys, your suffering was like great and just, but it seems that you stuck somewhere. But at this time, we see that this is our responsibility to be with our suffering nation. So, and we do support our army. Because it is streamed, I can share how we do this. And I can tell you that the biggest moments when I experienced God's physical presence, it was when we were serving communion in a. Sometimes we had, we heard explosions and shooting. Some people close understanding of, they say, how do you know that they believe in Jesus? Well, first of all, you have to squeeze your liturgy because you don't have a lot of time going on, you know. And we tell soldiers, I will Jesus fight for you. And you believe. When I will give you wine, I will tell you blood if you are a man. So I tell them this information, and then, amen. 50% of them, it was the first communion they ever had. And for some of them, it was the last one. So I can imagine myself enjoying freedom in Ukraine when thousands of soldiers are being killed and I was somewhere else because I'm a believer. You know, I don't take gun. You know, I can't afford this. I can tell you more. I always have feeling of guilt when I sleep in my bed. And as a man, sometimes my conscience asks me, like, Ivan, you are in your apartment, but men of your age are in trenches. Like, why? So I believe that this is our calling, to be right there, right there in the epicenter of suffering. So, okay, yeah.
When you say we, does that include the Russian Orthodox ministers? Is it an inclusive we?
Ukrainian Orthodox Church which has its center in Moscow, has some challenges because somehow they are not capable to stand up and say, stop and repent. I have friends among Orthodox priests of the Russian Orthodox Church, and they are in a huge dilemma quite often. They run a funeral for Ukrainian soldier being killed by the Russians. There are family members, wife, children. Everybody is weeping. And he was killed by the Russians. And according to your liturgy, you have to bless Cyril as a bishop of Russian Orthodox Church. But Cyril, he openly blessed Russian army to kill Ukrainians. How you can reconcile this? So there is rumors and propaganda that our president is persecuting Orthodox Church. It's not true. The only requirement that our society and our government has, you can be led from a capital city of the country which is aggressor against our country. So, and I can tell you that in Ukraine, there is a great interfaith and interchurch dialogue. And what brought me here, I am here as part of Ukrainian Council of Churches, which consists of Catholic, Orthodox, Greek Catholic, all kinds of Protestants, Muslim and Jewish community. And we will spend several days visiting different locations and meeting with different people here. So in Ukraine there is a freedom. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for your important work in Ukraine and for your inspiring words here as well. I just wanted to clarify that there is also the Ukrainian, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is separate from the Orthodox Church that is affiliated with Moscow. So I'm very happy to hear that all the different religions, the Protestants, the Orthodox, the Catholics are working together, and that you know, this horrible situation has brought them together to work for the good for everyone, for all Ukrainians.
Yes.
Thank you for your bravery again and for your really very important work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us this morning and discussing such a difficult topic in your circumstances. I thought your stories were just incredible to hear this from someone that's actually experienced what's happened in Ukraine. And a reaction I had was, how can we help? How can we stand with you in this?
I have a well-developed answer for this question, and thank you for asking. I will tell, first of all, pray, and you will think, okay, yes, he wants to be spiritual and he asks for prayer. No, prayer does work. We can't explain many things without referring to God and His answers to our prayers. So we ask you to pray because we are fighting a giant. If you will compare Ukraine and Russia, there's no way Ukraine will sustain. So prayer is number one. Second, share your competence with us. Your nation has a great experience in chaplaincy, in trauma healing. We do not. 7 million Ukrainian children have this status, children of a war. It means that whole of their life, this trauma will follow them unless church will do something. Third, support us financially for our educational and relief ministries. There is a huge need. Last but not least, do advocacy on behalf of Ukraine. Since we are in the capital city of the United States of America, make sure your government knows that you care. Without United States of America, we will not survive. We are grateful for all support we have, for all weapons we receive. Your patriots are saving lives every single night. We are shelled every single night. But the problem is, Kyiv and other big cities are better protected, but the rest are not. And sometimes we feel that we get support in order not to be killed, but it's not enough to finish this war. We want to finish this war. When we go to soldiers, they say, give us weapons. We want to finish this war and go home. So speak to your people from politics. It's very important.
I'm going to pass this over, but your third point about supporting relief efforts, you've alluded to a little bit of these, but I think it may be really encouraging to all of us to hear some of the things that you and the other churches have been specifically involved in.
Yeah, church is doing an extremely important work, providing food, medicine, water, and evacuation for people. Our small canteen at our seminary provides 1,500 hot meals per week. For people that they are nobody for us, they are not members of our churches, they are not our relatives, they're just people, and this is enough for us. So I can't imagine Ukraine and this suffering without a church. Amazing ministry. And we went beyond our previous understanding of holistic mission. The most radical thing that I was doing as a seminary president, it was delivering dead bodies in our seminary bus. So I have never been trained for this. But now holistic mission is also meant like this. So Ukraine is heavily wounded. Our government is occupied with protection, and it is absolutely right. We do not have resources to care about our people. However, church is the great instrument, but I want to make it as clear as I can. Without generous people like you are and in other countries, our own resources would finish on the second day of the war. We are capable to care about millions of people only because the global church is generous and missional. So, we are moved to tears when we see how nations, they opened their hearts and homes for our fellow citizens. And we learned that we called wrong people our brothers. We didn't know that we have more brothers. We have never used this word for them. But they opened their hearts toward Ukraine. So now churches are doing extremely big relief ministry. Evacuation of people, providing food, providing firewoods and stoves in order to survive cold winters. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for being here this morning and hearing from you. You asked for support, you asked for advocacy, and I have just one little thing to tell you. I don't know how long you've been in Washington, but have you noticed the Ukrainian flags that you sometimes see outside homes? Near where I live, there's a woman that has a house there where she put out a Ukrainian flag, a small one, for every day of the war. And last year, I went past her house, this year, February 24th, and she had put in her window 365 days of war. And I stopped at the house and I said to her, wow, And she said, no, people need to be aware. People need to be aware of the day-to-day toll that this war is having on a small nation. And I went by later on, and she had bought another box of flags. And I said, how is that not disheartening, buying another whole box of flags? How does this end? How can it go on? What happens when you've run out of grass in the front of your house for these flags? So I wondered whether you have in your mind thought about,
Yesterday I did a
Thank you.
run in Washington, and I had a very slow pace because I was stopping and making photo of every flag. So it was very, very low speed because it touched our hearts deeply. We know that we live in a broken world. We know that you don't have to care about Ukrainians. But we were amazed and inspired to see how the global world responded. And traveling across the United States to see all of this Ukrainians flag, it gives us hope that we are not alone, that some people care. So I want to ask you, keep thinking about us and keep supporting Ukraine.
We'll close with that. And I think one of the things